Hi everyone, Ainsley here from Small Fry Creations, where we tackle everything DIY, and this week I'm making a market display stand, or a display stand for anything really. Let me show you how I did it. We're heading into market season as we get closer to Christmas, so today I'm going to show you a super simple market display stand that you can make to display your wares this season at the markets. It's made from one sheet of plywood, and our first step is to cut down the main pegboard area, and if you don't have a table saw or a track saw, you can definitely get the hardware store to cut down this section for you. I'm going to grab out the track saw and get to work. In order to make the stand out of one sheet of plywood, I sized the main part of the pegboard 1 meter wide by 1600 mil high. Now don't throw away any of the offcuts, as I use these at the end to make some shelves for the stand. I wanted a clean edge on each side of the pegboard, so I cut one end slightly oversized and then cut to the final dimension at the other end. One of the advantages of using the track saw is that it has a function where you can make a scoring cut to start with, which helps eliminate tear out, and then finish the cut off with a second pass. I made my way around the pegboard until I had it cut to size. I only have one length of track for my track saw, so on the long cut I needed to make the cut and then move the track along. To make the bottom semicircles to hold the pegboard up, I firstly cut the plywood to width, which was 580 mil. To cut the semicircles, I'm using my Makita palm router, so my first step was to attach the plunge base to my circle cutting jig. If you're looking on how to make a simple circle cutting jig, I will leave a link in the description below to my video where I show you some great ways to use a router, including cutting circles and templating, which we will do a little bit later on in this video. The semicircle's diameter is 290 mil, which I made sure to mark and drill on my circle cutting jig before placing it on the plywood. I marked the center of the plywood as close to the bottom edge as I could, and I started to cut the semicircles. I made the cut in a couple of passes with a straight router bit. Once I had the first semicircle cut, I took the plywood to the table saw to cut a nice new straight bottom edge. Then I would repeat the process to cut the next semicircle. There isn't a lot of room for error, so each time I took the plywood to the table saw, I made sure to cut the least amount off that I could. To make sure the stand was sturdy and strong, I doubled up the plywood, so I needed 4 semicircles in total. The next part of making sure the stand was strong and sturdy as possible was the joinery. Using half laps means the stand and the pegboard will have good contact and strength to stand up, and is also great for transport as you can easily pull it apart. You could use a jigsaw to cut the half laps, but I never get good results with the jigsaw, and I wanted the fit to be clean and strong, so I went with a templating method, which worked out perfectly. I learnt this technique from Uncle Knackers from DIY for Knuckleheads, and if you haven't checked him out, do yourself a favour and do so. This technique takes out the need to measure and lowers the chance of error. To create the half laps, I started with making the template. Using a square plywood offcut, some scrap pieces of timber and double-sided tape, I placed my plywood guide on the other piece of plywood in the centre, and then placed the scrap wood with double-sided tape around the plywood to create the template. Once the scrap wood was double-sided taped to the plywood, I used my templating router bit in my palm router and had the bearing of the router bit run along the scrap wood, cutting through the plywood, giving me the template to then use on the semicircles to cut the half laps. I marked the center of the template and then lined that center line up with the center of the semicircle. The template can then be clamped down, and with the same templating router bit, I ran it along the template and removed the plywood. I came back with a jigsaw just to square the ends of the half laps so that the plywood would seat nicely. I did this process to 2 of the semicircles. Once I had 2 done, it was time to glue the plywood semicircles together so the plywood was double thickness. I used my nail gun to hold everything in place while the glue dried, and this allowed me to keep moving with the project. Now I can use the top plywood piece that is already cut to become the template for the lower piece of plywood. This means everything lines up for a great fit and saves on sanding and takes out any error. To cut the half lap on the pegboard, I repeated the process of making the template, but this time my plywood guide was double thickness plywood, as this is what the semicircles are. Another advantage to this template method is it makes this project very repeatable. I am selling these and the template speeds up the making process. Since this video, I have made another pegboard and knocked the whole build out in 2 hours. It was then as simple as clamping the template onto the pegboard and cutting away the plywood. I positioned the half laps of the pegboard 100mm in from each side. Again, squaring the cut with the jigsaw. Now it's time to make this pegboard a pegboard. You can space the holes however you like, depending on what you're using your pegboard for. But for me, I decided to space the holes 100mm in from each side and then 160mm apart from there across the pegboard and 150mm apart down the pegboard. I marked all the holes to start, and then using a 30mm spade bit, I drilled all of my holes. To avoid tear out on the back side of the plywood, I drilled from the front part way through, and then I could flip the plywood and finish drilling the holes. This made for clean cuts, and using the spade bit meant drilling the holes was really quick. To finish the pegboard off, I used a small roundover bit in the router and rounded over all of the holes, edges of the pegboard and also the semicircles. After sanding everything up to 220 grit, I applied a couple of coats of clear satin poly, and this project was ready to be set up and put to the test. I cut the offcuts from the beginning of this project to different lengths to be used as shelves, which can come in handy depending on what you're displaying. The last piece of the puzzle were the pegs for the board. I cut 30mm dowel to 100mm lengths and ensured that they were sanded smooth so they would fit nicely in the holes. The templates were the hero of this project for sure. It takes away the need to measure, the chance for error, and gives a perfect fit. The marked display stand itself is super sturdy and strong, and I'm extremely happy with how it's turned out. And there you have it, a very simple market display stand that you can customize to display anything that you're selling, or if you're in the home, you can customize the shelves or the pegs and put them wherever you like to suit your needs. Now, I hope you have liked this video. If you have, help me out by hitting those subscribe and like buttons, and I'll see you on the next one.